very different. This is going to be a marathon, a PowerPoint marathon, and I know I won't get done, so let me figure out what I'm doing here. All right. Karen Johnson and Paula Gollenbeck have brought us important contributions about narrative writing and its power to foster teacher development through exploration of identity. Having experienced the power of reflective writing in the trajectories of my own personal and professional life, I'm naturally drawn to their work. As such, over the past few years, I've been digging into this topic of reflective writing to foster teacher identity development. My research has focused on using reflective writing to foster this is a mouthful, IC perspective-taking FL education teacher candidates. The following principles have been guiding my instructional delivery and informing the curricula of my methods courses. Did that go on? Yes, okay. I've framed my use of narrative writing assignments in these methods courses with a certain reasoning in mind. The purpose of the reflective writing assignments is to prompt teacher candidate thinking in particular ways, and these goals for the writing assignments are explicitly shared with the teacher candidates. Over the past couple of years, I have integrated into my methods courses an ethnocultural identity project, also known as ethnocultural interview project, which I'm just going to refer to as ECIP, and a teacher identity journal. I'm not going to indulge in detail about these two assignments since they're not the focus of today's topic for me, but I'll briefly explain them to you, and I'm happy to share more if you're interested. The ECIP is a 4-phase interview-based project where candidates compare themselves, to an other individual they have interviewed, followed by a comparative analysis. The teacher identity journal is used specifically to address course and time-sensitive topics and engage candidates in reflective and focused thinking. These have been implemented as assignments along with lesson planning, micro-teaching, all the fairly predictable course components. And not surprisingly, the integration of these consciousness-raising course components has evoked some interesting research. So I've been curious about the potential of these activities to encourage mindfulness toward interculturality, and I'll briefly share with you what I've discovered in a couple kind of precursor projects to frame the findings of this newer study today. For the first investigation, I explored perspective-taking capacity in teacher candidates as exhibited in their reflective writing assignments that are associated with that ECIP. I then explored possible links between their narrative writing and the ways in which they wrote lesson plans and commentaries, particularly examining how they dressed culture. And you'll see my 4 themes: cultural perspectives, meaningful comparisons, learning experiences that support P12 students in exploring the diversity in their own culture or cultures, and experiences for P12 students to explore the diversity of perspectives within the target culture. So I should quickly point out that the article that Paula Garrett-Rex and I were happy to have included in the 2014 proceedings from this conference, because that article kind of outlines a project that we completed across our 2 universities, and the findings essentially launched all this subsequent investigation for me. So back to the theme of analyzing these ECIP written reflections, I came up with 3 levels of perspective-taking capacity among the teacher candidates: high, medium, low, right? Okay, and they were operationally defined or illustrated through the examples of student writing, and I was drawing primarily on these indicators of flexibility, resilience, so forth, that we've seen a lot in the literature. So of the 7 teacher candidate cases I examined, 3 of them fell clearly into kind of a high or low range. 2 were in the high and 1 in the low, and then the other ones were kind of middling, overlapping. So for the second part of this same investigation, and the white letters are the cases we're going to look at more in depth. For the second part of the same investigation, I looked at the possible relationships between these kind of levels I came up with and what they were able to do with respect to IC, or what I call perspective-taking culture teaching in their lesson planning. So the findings were very mixed, and these are the 4 strands that I am calling perspective-taking IC teaching. The findings were really mixed. Those who had that kind of high level had lots of incidences in their lesson plans. Low, same. The middle ones were messy. So connecting these data to the present study, these are my 3 cases. So I've given them colors and names because I got so confused with my data, so this is kind of for me and maybe for you too. So we have Ruby, Abby, and Mary. And here you can see the kind of collective results of their ability to integrate and address culture in those 4 domains into their lesson plans and commentaries. There wasn't a lot of variation between those 2 curriculum assignments and the degree of attention they gave to those 4 IC culture domains. However, their work did show that explicit attention to diversity in other cultures is notably weak, and diversity among my own culture was very weak, the weakest, right? So there's lots of things we could say about this, but let's get closer to today's topic by looking at the next one. So that next one, I wanted to go deeper into this notion of what does teacher identity mean, or what does it look like in narrative writing, by looking at a broader spectrum of reflective writing assignments. I did a single case study. I went beyond just the ECIP, and I came up with some little bit different coding strands by drawing from Landhoff and Johnson, who talk about social activity, and then from Paula Gallenbeck, who writes about how teachers evoke emotion and stories as they describe their personal and professional lives. So these were my research questions. So I wanted to look at what do the social elements look like in narrative writing, and what kind of use do they make of personal stories? The second question I'll come back to in a minute. So here you can see a pie chart and the 4 strands that emerged from the thematic analysis. Topics pretty much were dictated by the content, or the content of the topics pretty much were a product of the topics assigned. The greatest frequency of references was to beliefs about teaching. Second greatest was use of personal stories, kind of equal of social and emotional references. Explicit references to cultural identity or assumptions were really linked to that one assignment that had that topic, as well as the learning community topic. So the frequency and use of personal stories across all entries, for me, is worth mentioning because only one journal assignment specifically prompted them to think about a personal story. And this plays a great part in what I found with the study I'm reporting on today. And according to Simon Borg, we should not be surprised. He reminds us that teaching has a powerful affective dimension. So even though we have this effect of on-demand and on-topic writing when we know their assignments are going to be graded, there's clearly something happening in terms of cognitive and identity processing. There's an articulated layering of issues across the spectrum of journal entries. Angela Scarino would call this evidence of knowingness, evidence that the teacher is reflective and reflexive and can articulate those layers. Johnson and Gallenbeck might refer to this as the storying and restoring of knowledge through reflection and writing. Even if these findings point to an evidence of knowingness, I suggest that it's presumptuous of me to claim as a teacher educator that I'm responsible for or instrumental in advancing foreign language teacher identity in the sense of like getting credit for that. I might instead humbly claim that the complex of course content, the assignments, the activities, the human interaction, even the dynamic in our online interactions or online community, they all cultivate a supportive environment to foster the development of teacher identity. But I even need to stop here because I'm compelled to note that it's truly within the domain of that individual teacher, teacher candidate, to quantify or qualify her identity development. This kind of harkens back to Stenhouse, who talked about self-critical inquiry, or Halliday, who talked about the individual's process of meaning-making as being key to human learning. So let's fast forward now to today's study. And here I'm keenly inclined towards Scarino's notion of situatedness that broadens the notion of background and considers foreground and future ground, kind of an individual's enculturation over time or their idioculture. Therefore, my method was to look beyond this ECIP, reflective writing, which may favor the notion of background, and I included subsequent reflective writing assignments. So for this one, I looked at that ECIP again, as well as 7 other reflective writing assignments, but with new coding questions. I returned to the designated levels of perspective taking, these labels I had put on the candidates in terms of their high, middling, and low capacity to be perspective takers. And I picked one who fell strictly in the high, one who was in that kind of middling. Abby has mostly high and some high mid. And I didn't pick the true low one because her case was complicated because of language mediation issues. So I picked the next one who was low with some mid. So as I said, I looked at the ECIP reflections and 7 different journal assignments. And here's just a quick overview of what those were. And I analyzed these according to a coding that I pulled from my first research question, which I kind of broke down into 3 strands. So I see kind of qualitatively different degrees of self-inquiry in the first 2 pieces. And the third one, then, looking at their beliefs about teaching. But as I coded, another strand emerged that I characterized as going deeper, and I labeled it as reflexivity. This strand wasn't solely associated with any other categories of awareness, exploration, or beliefs, but kind of emerged from these categories. In one of her presentations, I heard Angela Scarino make a distinction between reflectivity that indicates mindful thinking and reflexivity that takes reflection further by kind of asking the question, so what does this mean to me? So before we look at what I found, I should confess that I was intrigued with bringing together the results from these 2 investigations I'd already shared, adding in a bit more, just kind of getting this giant toss salad. So let's see what the toss salad looks like just for a second. So the pie chart documents that, again, in their lesson plans, those total number of incidences, kind of perspective-taking culture incidences in their lesson plans and commentaries. But what I add to here is her high level. So this is Ruby with the high, and she has 79 incidences. Abby has 10 incidences, although she was a mid, and Mary has 33. Then we look at what happened when I looked at the present one, the 7 journal entries plus the ethnoculture project, and looked at these different themes of awareness of cultural identity, so the awareness exploration and so forth. Ruby has 49, Abby 68, and Mary 27. So these are kind of surprising and unexpected. The relative emphasis to each coded category is certainly unique to each case. I don't really see any patterns or trends. And what I really see as crazy is that Abby, whom I identified in this middle range, had way less cultural references in her lesson plan designs than Mary, who was supposedly in the low level of being a perspective-taking educator. So, is my coding off base? I don't think so. Rather, I think these findings point out, first of all, actually I'm thinking back to what Dr. Dervin said. You know, maybe I was looking for that liquid ideal instead of the liquid real, because I think liquid real came out. So we know qualitative study yields messy results. That's not any news flash. But I think they bring us back to the highly individualized journey of teacher identity development. And it's crucial to highlight the personalization of each candidate's teacher identity journey and to remind myself that I'm a facilitator of learning, but the candidates hold the keys to meaning making. My research spotlights my interests, the stuff I'm interested in. These are my pet things as a teacher educator, and these represent what I see as my contribution to the teacher candidates or to our teacher prep program and to the profession, or paying it forward to the schools where the candidates get jobs. But if this is my calling to be a teacher, I think I'm on the wrong slide. If this is my calling to be a teacher educator that inspires teacher identity development and a reflectivity infused with cultural perspective taking, then how does this inform my work? In what ways has this project advanced my raison d'etre? Well, each iteration of the related inquiries has indeed prompted new assignments or projects and has inspired renovated approaches to implementing course assignments. The quest to inspire reflectivity and identity development toward IC-infused culture teaching does get better. I've seen the teacher candidates demonstrating increased levels of reflexivity. I'm getting better at facilitating their preparation to become IC-conscious P12 teachers of language and culture. I feel like I'm successfully peeling the onion, but the project has reminded me that it's not a single onion, but a big basket of onions, and each one peels its own way, and the peeling process is different. So let's get to the second research question. What characterizes the ways in which the teacher educator is responsive? So I'm going to have to kind of go ahead. I'm behind here. So I found that I used basically 4 types of feedback when I analyzed the way I had provided feedback. And you can see those here, and I have a link if you want to look to details on that. And then, so what am I looking at? What does this mean? So then I gave them this in-class writing assignment to ask them, what was this like for you? And, was it a help or a hindrance? What was this recursive feedback stuff like? And these are the larger findings, but let's just go to our smaller group. And Ruby says largely supportive. She described specific benefits, but she had mixed feelings about how long it went on. It became tedious, and she gave me some great ideas for improving it. Abby pretty much discounted the whole feedback thing. She said, because this is in English, and I'm a Chinese teacher, and so it's not useful because I'm having to do all this translating. Mary said it gave her specific guidance on how to write lesson plans, which I guess she was struggling with. So that's kind of the summary. I think I'm going to go forward here and try to find where I am here. So the advancing their IC culture-focused lesson planning may or may not have been supported by the cycles of instructor feedback. Even though it was well-intentioned, yeah, maybe I went overboard, too much of a good thing. Several of them said that. And maybe, though well-intentioned, it doesn't fit everybody. Meaning making through narrative writing may not be everybody's thing. Metacognitive awareness of one's learning might differ from among individuals. Some may not be able to articulate, especially in writing, what they understand about their learning process. So, does narrative writing evoke consciousness raising? Yes, absolutely. But there's no guarantee that this works for everyone. Does narrative writing evoke consciousness raising? Yes, there are compelling cases, and we have some in these studies, but they don't represent the whole of the population of our second language teachers. Does heightened consciousness beget identity development? Well, I guess I can say yes, but also have to qualify that. There's no guarantee across the board. And I was thinking about the toolbox metaphor. I think that these consciousness-raising instructional approaches have an important place in the toolbox. Their effectiveness is illustrated, but the toolbox certainly has room for more tools. We've not entirely filled it yet. So, as I mentioned about the unique situatedness or idioculture of each individual candidate, or even us as teacher educators, I'm reminded to consider their identities, to understand and account for their situatedness and their learning styles and the funds of knowledge that they bring. In my role as methods instructor, I will continue to function as a humble instrument. I suspect this research is going to go even further, but I would like to say that I think these tools, the Ethnocultural Identity Project, the journal, can contribute to meaning-based approaches, but they can't stand alone, and they're not going to work for everyone, is what I have found out. So I kind of had this slide as a concluding slide, just the idea of, it's up to these individuals to figure out what's on that card and express who they are and process through it. And I have references and so forth if you're interested, but that's pretty much it.